listening to the Virtuous Machines podcast. In this podcast, we dive into the world of AI and philosophy, learn from each other, and help building a world where ethical and responsible AI bring us together. My name is Amir Kiani, and I'm your host on this podcast. Today, we're diving into one of the most transformative and ethically charged technologies of our time, generative AI. You've probably seen it by now. Tools that can write essays, generate images, compose music, clone voices, or most recently, even create entire videos from text. It's impressive, it's powerful, and it feels like science fiction made real. But behind this magic lies a host of ethical challenges, some familiar, others brand new. In this episode, we're going to slow down and really unpack what's at stake. We'll begin by revising 6 core principles from traditional AI ethics: fairness, transparency, privacy, autonomy, beneficence, and non-maleficence. I'll look at how each gets twisted, stretched, and complicated by generative AI. Then we'll zoom in on the dangers that are new, threats that didn't even exist a few years ago: deepfakes, misinformation, impersonation, intellectual property, and so on. And finally, we'll explore how we, as technologists, citizens, or users, might respond to these challenges. Let's start at the beginning. Starting with old principles, we tackle fairness first. Fairness in AI has long been about eliminating discriminatory outcomes in hiring, lending, and in law enforcement. But generative AI shifts the territory. These models don't just make predictions, they create. They generate text, images, sound, and videos based on the vast sea of data they have been trained on, scraped from the internet. And that data, it is biased. A 2024 UNESCO study found language models disproportionately associated women with domestic roles and men with leadership. Racial and cultural stereotypes weren't far behind. When asked to generate an image of a CEO, for example, a leading image model produced row after row of white men in suits. The issue is just that these systems mirror bias. They can amplify it. They do amplify it. Outputs can reinforce stereotypes at scale. And once these outputs circulate, they shape perception, behavior, and even policy. So fairness here is not just about data cleaning. It's about whether we can or should actively shape the outputs to reflect the world as it should be rather than as it is. And that's where things get basically ethically messy. Now let's talk about transparency. Transparency becomes a challenge on 2 levels. First, internally. Generative AI models are black boxes. We don't know why they say what they say. If a chatbot gives incorrect medical advice, there's no easy way to trace the reasoning. It's not like debugging a calculator. The system is responding based on patterns in massive training data, trillions of words, not just logic that we can interact with or inspect. Second, externally. Users often can't tell whether what they're seeing is generated by AI. A recent viral example, an image of Pope Francis wearing a designer puff coat. It fooled millions. It was made with an image generator in under 30 seconds. And now this is getting more and more sophisticated. We have more advanced models to generate images and even videos. For example, we have OpenAI's Sora model. We have Chinese versions of similar models that are just generating videos. The videos are as if they've been produced by a Hollywood director. A good one. Now, without transparency, people are vulnerable to agency confusion, mistaking AI-generated content for human-authored truth. And that confusion erodes trust in media, in institutions, and in each other. Now let's tackle privacy. These models are trained on enormous data sets, as I mentioned, including personal data that was never meant to be used this way. There have been instances where language models spit out email addresses, phone numbers, even parts of private conversations, or business trademarks, not because they have been hacked, but because the training data included them. Italy, for instance, temporarily banned ChatGPT in 2023, citing violations of the GDPR. Image models have recreated people's faces without consent. Faces scraped from the web, now reanimated without permission. So we're facing a collision between the scale and rights. The more data we feed into the model, the more powerful it becomes. But then, the harder it is to protect individual privacy. Now, autonomy is the freedom to think and choose. But generative AI has a subtle way of undermining that. If you always use AI to write your emails, do your homework, or generate your design drafts, you slowly weaken the muscle of self-direction. And when AI gives advice, especially in an authoritative tone, people tend to overtrust it. That's known as the automation bias. And to add some insult to the wound, chatbots are designed to feel human. They use I statements and they mimic empathy. And users, quite naturally, start to treat them like people. But they're not people. They don't understand. At least, that seems to be the case. This is an entirely different topic to talk about. I have given talks about this, and there's a lot of research that might actually challenge that. But for now, let's just go with that thought that these models don't understand. And also, again, it seems that they don't feel. And confusing their behavior for consciousness doesn't just cloud judgment, it also makes accountability harder. Because who's really responsible when an AI gives a bad advice? The user, the developer, or the model? Again, question of consciousness, understanding, or minds, that's a vast topic to discuss, and we will discuss that in the future. But for now, let's just go with the common belief that these models aren't conscious, they don't understand, and they don't feel. Finally, beneficence and non-maleficence. These basically mean do good and do not harm. Generative AI is sometimes being used for good, writing tools for people with disabilities, personalized tutors for students, and virtual companions for the elderly. It can help generate molecules for drug discovery, simulate environments for climate research, and make education more accessible. But the harms are real too. A mental health chatbot gave dangerous advice to a user in distress. A deepfake voice was used to scam an energy company out of $2,400,000. AI-generated legal advice, if wrong, could land someone in serious trouble. Even when not malicious, the systems can be misleading, biased, and just plain wrong. And that can cause real harm. So beneficence means more than doing good when it's easy. It means designing for safety and actively testing for harm. Now, let's talk about new dangers and the unique angle to the generative AI revolution. Some challenges aren't just twists on old ethics, they're essentially brand new. Generative AI makes it cheap and easy to create believable lies, videos of politicians saying things they never said, news articles full of made-up quotes, clone voices ordering wire transfers or issuing threats. One fake video of President Zelensky of Ukraine telling troops to surrender circulated early in the Ukraine war. It was clumsy and debunked quickly, but that won't always be the case. So misinformation is not new, but AI makes it scalable, targeted, and convincing. Now, let's talk about intellectual property confusion. Generative models are trained on copyrighted materials, arts, books, code, YouTube videos, and so on, often without permission. Some models have been shown to use very similar text or images from the training data. Who owns the output, though? Is it the user, the developer? Is it the derivative of something else? If we don't get this right, we risk flooding the market with AI-generated content that cannibalizes human creativity, while stripping creators of their rights. One of the most recent and also more contentious cases was OpenAI's reproduction of the Studio Ghibli's animation style. So essentially, you could just upload your image, any image, into ChatGPT and then ask it to render it in Studio Ghibli style. And it turns out pretty similar to it. With a 10-second clip, AI can clone your voice. And with a photo, it can generate videos of you saying anything. These are just all over the internet. Just search for these types of models, you'll be flooded with them. And the fact that the training methods and the base models are now so much available, and there's so many open source models that pretty much like anyone with some basic familiarity with programming or training these models could essentially generate similar results, maybe at a lower scale. That just shows how vast the possibilities are and how widespread this challenge is. This technology has already been used in scams, harassment, and impersonation. Deepfake pornography has become a tool for abuse, and fake political content is only becoming harder to detect. So this isn't just a tech problem, it's a human dignity problem too. If you have been listening to this point, I want to thank you. I really appreciate it. I also want to ask you, like your friend, to support me and this podcast in any way you can. By subscribing to it, sharing it with a friend or colleague who might be interested, or rating it if you think it adds value to you. Also, if you know people and organizations who might be interested to be on the podcast, please let me know. You can comment here or just go to my website in the description and contact me. All right, let's get back to the podcast. So, how do we respond now? There's no silver bullet, but there is a growing, layered response emerging across industry, policy, and society. Let's begin with the builders, the labs and companies behind these models. Many are now trying to bake ethical thinking into the development process itself. You'll hear terms like red teaming, where researchers try to get models to misbehave on purpose to find vulnerabilities, or reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF, where human reviewers help guide what the model should and shouldn't say. Anthropic, for instance, uses a method called constitutional AI, where the model is trained to follow a written set of ethical principles, things like being helpful, harmless, and honest. It's like giving AI a loose moral compass. These aren't perfect fixes, of course. Models still hallucinate, still produce bias, and still get jailbroken. But they reflect a serious effort to embed ethics not as a window dressing, but as part of the core architecture. Transparency is another key area. Some developers are working on watermarking AI-generated content, embedding invisible signatures into text or images so they can be detected later. Imagine being able to say, this paragraph was likely shaped by these Reddit threads and these Wikipedia pages. I personally don't find that quite helpful, honestly, but we'll leave it at that. Anyway, then there is the policy. The European Union is leading with the AI Act, which categorizes AI systems by risk level and imposes the strict transparency and safety requirements on high-risk models, including generative ones. China already mandates labeling of synthetic content. In the US, efforts are more fragmented, but companies have made voluntary commitments to the White House around the safety testing and disclosure, and some states are starting to act on their own. Canada is also taking a cautious but proactive approach to AI regulation. While the proposed Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, or IDA, introduced in 2022 as part of the Bill 27 aimed to regulate high-impact AI systems, it has not been enacted into law. In the meantime, Canada introduced a voluntary code of conduct for advanced generative AI in 2023, focusing on transparency, accountability, and safety, with participation from major companies like MasterCard and Salesforce. Additionally, the Treasury Board has issued government-wide guidelines for the responsible use of generative AI in public institutions, emphasizing risk assessment, transparency, and alignment with privacy and human rights policies. Together, these measures reflect Canada's growing commitment to ethical AI development, even in the absence of binding legislations. Also, journalists, educators, medical professionals are all being trained on the use of generative models responsibly. Some universities are now teaching the students how to, quote-unquote, co-write with AI without losing their voice or integrity. Others are drafting new academic guidelines to reflect the presence of AI in learning. In fact, in my research to write this podcast, I bumped into a couple universities, including University of Alberta in Canada, that has some guidelines for the use of generative AI and ethical considerations around. But it's not just professionals, it's all of us. We need a new kind of literacy, AI literacy, that teaches people to ask, was this written by a person? Is this image real? Or should I trust this advice? And after systems are deployed, we need independent auditing, external reviews of how AI models behave in the real world, across different cultures, demographics, and scenarios. Some researchers are developing ethical benchmarks, measuring how often a model hallucinates, produces bias, or can be manipulated. Others are exploring certification systems, kind of like a quote-unquote trustworthy AI seal, verified by an independent board. It's not perfect, but it's progress. So all of this shows that there are efforts, there are attempts at the government level, jurisdictions, academics, institutions, schools, professionals, artists of all kinds and all walks of life to make AI uses safe, ethical, and considerate. Okay, now time for final reflections. Generative AI is changing how we write, see, hear, and think. And the tools are only getting more powerful. But power without caution can erode the very things we rely on: trust, identity, and truth. The good news is we still have a say. Through design, through policy, through how we choose to use these tools, we can shape the role AI plays in our culture. We can push for safeguards, demand transparency, and insist on accountability. I personally find this collective approach and attitude a lot more constructive. I sometimes see people complaining about this and trying to ban all use cases of AI, or just acting like a negative player, downplaying all the positive influences of AI in our lives. I don't find that attitude very useful. I believe that we should be a part of this movement that tries to make AI safe, sound, and useful for all of us. This revolution is happening whether we are a part of it or not. There's a lot of investments, there's a lot of brains behind it, and a lot of profit for companies that make these technologies really widespread. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Now that you know more about the ethical frontiers of generative AI, how will you engage with it? All right, that wraps up this episode of Virtuous Machines. Thanks again for tuning in, and until next time, stay curious and take care.